Hey everyone, welcome to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast, the ultimate blueprint to self-love and inner peace. I'm your host, Danielle Ban. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, a life coach to women, meditation teacher, and author, I've spent my life studying and learning from the stories that make us human. It's my passion and goal to help you shift your mindset and create a lifelong revolution to help you reach your greatest potential. I often talk about trauma, what it is, and how it impacts our behavior. Still, unless you're sitting in private therapy session with me or someone else, you rarely get a glimpse at the small nuances of trauma, especially trauma that occurs in childhood. I sat down with fellow trauma expert, therapist, and author Riana Milne to talk about childhood trauma, mindset, and how we can take control of our life despite our past. Riana takes us into childhood trauma and helps break down what it really means and helps us understand that many things we do result from something we may just need to clean up. So let's dive right in. The Get Your Life Together Girl podcast starts right now. We all have trauma of some sort. Most of the time, though, we don't realize how much it actually impacts us into our adulthood. So that's the conversation we're going to be having today. I'm talking to Riana today. She's a well-known mindset coach, and I'm going to have you just kind of introduce yourself, let us know who you are, and let's talk about the impact of childhood trauma.
Sure. It's good to meet with you, Danielle. Thank you for having me on your show.
Yes, of course.
All right. For 23 years, I've been a licensed mental health counselor in private practice. My company is called Therapy by the Sea. And in 2009 and 10, I got certified as a life relationship coach for singles and couples from RCI, Relationship Coaching Institute. So I love the coaching model because it's educational and I can work with people around the world. I do work with those singles couples from 16 to 76 years old, men and women, straight and LGBTQ. So that's a little bit about me.
Fantastic. It sounds like we have a lot in common and we have a lot to talk about. Yes. As a licensed counselor, you know that childhood trauma impacts us long into our adulthood. We have a new definition of trauma, and we talk about that a lot on this show. Would you give us your understanding of trauma so that we can kind of all have a space to operate from?
So we did describe trauma in two ways, big T trauma and little t trauma. So big T trauma means a major event that happens to you when you're younger, a car accident, you lose a limb, something like that. Little t trauma is what most people don't consider. These are the ongoing emotional difficulties that kids go through over and over and over again, and then becomes almost normalized and patterns become ingrained or subconscious. Working in a mental health ward with kids ages 5 through 19. I worked in the schools as a SAC counselor, student assistance counselor, which handled all the emotionally upset kids from kindergarten all the way through college. So every grade level, even a school psychologist at high school level. And then I was in a drug and alcohol rehab because I'm also LCADC, which is a drug and alcohol counselor. So I worked in a teen center, and I also worked with women from the prison system in the rehab center. So working with all these different populations, different ages, backgrounds, cultural, all various ends of the world there. I created the childhood trauma checklist in 2012. So that's how we describe it. My clients help identify what traumas they have had, the top 10 traumas, by using my list, which is really quite different from the ACE list.
Would you mind going into that list?
Yes, sure. The ACE list is from Kaiser Permanente Group. I saw that around 2016. And I'm like, how could they miss kids from the foster care system? Because they were right as a counselor. How did they miss bullying? How did they miss abandonment? So again, this is from my true work experience with kids. So the first one, before I go into childhood trauma, I do want to explain it does definitely go through 3 generations. And in 2021, the research came out that 100% of us have childhood trauma.
Right.
When I was first doing the research in 2011, 2012, it was 90% of people could identify that they've had childhood trauma. So now it's up to 100. So the first one is if you've had addiction in the family. Being an addiction therapist, I name 12 of them. So it's drugs, alcohol. That's all Kaiser names. So these are the rest that
right.
going on in the household. The sex, meaning you knew your parent was a cheater. Porn addiction, gambling, hoarding, spending, eating, gaming, TV watching, workaholism, and social media, always being on the phones or your computer at the expense of your time with your kids. Second one is verbal messaging. So did you hear the words, I love you? Did you get compliments? Or instead, where you rarely complimented, you got a lot of verbal put downs like, change your clothes, you look fat in that kind of comments. Also, what was the style of your parents' communication? When there was an issue, were they yelling and screaming at each other? If that's the case, you may tend to yell when you have a disagreement, or the opposite, you may shut down and become passive aggressive and afraid to speak your feelings. That's 2. Number 3 is emotional abuse and neglect. Number 4 is any physical abuse, rape, or molestation. And again, these events, any of these could happen inside or outside of the home. The next one is abandonment. So I name fault and no fault abandonment. So a no fault abandonment would be if a parent died early, if a parent leaves the home to go serve their country in war, or like my case, my dad was FBI, CIA, and we didn't know where he was. And I remember asking, when's dad coming home? And my mom said, well, I don't know where he is, which was very upsetting for her and me as a child. So, but that's how he supported the family. So we call that a no fault abandonment.
Right.
A fault abandonment is if you're never involved with your child's life, if you are together with the child while the couple's together, but when you break up, you rarely see the child. And it also counts if you are in the home, but you're really connected to the child. Like, so you might go from your home office, come home, eat dinner, go into the other office. It's just, workaholism again, or just not attending your children's events at school. So you're not emotionally really connected. The next one, trauma 6, is if you're in the foster care system, you were adopted, or you had to go live in another person's home. Your parents couldn't keep you, even if that's grandma's home or an aunt or uncle or family friend.
Right.
The next one, I had a client say, well, does it count if you don't want to go home? If you're always alcoholic. I said, yes, that would count.
Yes, it does count.
Okay. So number 7 is one that most people can identify with really easily, and that's personal trauma. Some way you felt different. You might have been a chubby little child and teased for that, or tall, skinny, and gawky and called a nerd. You might have been the only African-American in all Caucasian school, or coming out LGBTQ and your peers or your parents did not accept you. Right. So in any way that you might have felt different or not good enough. 8 is around the sibling. So sibling trauma is they might have been bullying you. Most often you'd see it as they are the golden child, the favored one. So the star athlete, more handsome, more beautiful, or the star student. The other one is if they were born with a medical condition and mom and dad had to command more time to be with them due to that, and you were kind of slighted. Number 9 now has 2 parts to it. Trauma 11, I had to bring down when I did the list. This was not very common. Now it's one of the most common traumas. First part is community trauma. So that would be the COVID pandemic would fit under that as community trauma. Any other nature events, flood, fires, hurricanes, where we're wiped out, our school shootings, our mass shootings. These are all community trauma. So look how many people are impacted by these things alone, right? And then that impacts the family, which is the other part of 9. So it also means if one of your family members is incarcerated, or you grow up in poverty or in a scary neighborhood and you never felt safe. So you're always craving safety as an adult. A lot of lack messages around money. This is around the family, just a lot of struggle. And then trauma 10 is mental health issues in mom and dad. And a lot of times we have to guess at that because they might have had the issues and not gone to counseling. So you might have known, especially the baby boomers. So the 2 most difficult for children to navigate is around bipolar and borderline personality. So I describe borderline as erratic moods. When they're good, they're great. When they're bad, they're horrid. And the child never knows what they're going to get, kind of keeping them on eggshells. That produces a child that's highly anxious. And then bipolar is manic depressive, and depression can show up in checking out emotionally or even anger. And people say, well, manic, that's a high and happy phase, right? Well, it could be, but it's often tied to addiction, like a gambling spree or a spending spree. That's a manic phase. So there's always a lot of consequences around that as well. So those are the top 10 traumas that I name.
Yeah, that list is expansive, and it's something that I know we both see all the time, every day,
Yeah.
in multiple sessions a day. It is something that many people do not realize impacts our daily activity, our thought process, our emotional intelligence, even our actions. There are, at least in my opinion, love to hear your thoughts, standard behaviors that we see people do when we are looking at trauma.
Mhm.
Would you like to talk about that a little bit? Because I think a lot of people miss the fact that they're doing something
Yeah.
and it stemmed from trauma.
Yes, childhood trauma. It all comes from childhood trauma.
Yeah.
So there's actually 7 areas of your life that's impacted from childhood trauma. So I'll briefly name those 7 and then the ways it shows up. So one is physical health. It definitely impacts the physical health. So sleep disorders, eating disorders, poor immune systems like fibromyalgia, Epstein-Barr virus, cardiovascular disease. The Kaiser study did prove that there's a shorter lifespan. So there's a lot of physical things that this ongoing stress will cause. Emotional difficulty, like controlling your emotions, being emotionally triggered easily, trouble really recognizing good emotional cues, really sensitive to stress and overreaction, excessive worry, hopelessness, I call, which is fear-based negative thinking, feelings of helplessness and lack of self-esteem, confidence. In relationships, we're showing it up as attachment problems, disorders, and I'll go into that in its own section.
Yes.
So just that's one thing on the map of 7. Difficulty forming relationships with peers, parent-child issues, problems in your romantic relationships, and of course the intergenerational cycles of abuse, neglect. Mental health, we see the depression, anxiety, those are the 2 cues that ongoing anxiety is from childhood trauma not healed. Behavioral issue, poor self-regulation, like a lot of impulse, social withdrawal, you like to isolate, aggression, risk-taking can cause in the teenagers illegal activity, getting you into trouble, sexually acting out or being sexually promiscuous to get love. For women, that's common. They use sex to get love.
Right.
And then they're often
Validation.
disappointed, and then their self-esteem is shattered again. Drug and alcohol misuse because they're self-medicating the pain. Right. And then in my students at school, there's 2 categories. One is cognition. So that impacts the readiness for them to learn. What is happening is when cortisol is so high, memory and learning goes down.
Right.
So many of my kids in the schools were thrown on ADHD medicine. I'm like, whoa, they're coming from a traumatic home. Right. So I was like the weirdo counselor that did meditation in my office. You know, Miss Riana's relaxation room, that's the sign on my door. So they knew this is a place to come and talk and chill out. You know, there's language delays, problems with concentration and poor academic achievement. So if I can calm this down, and we also did vitamin therapy. I had a fabulous Indian doctor that I worked with that the students would go with their parents, and he would talk to them about cleaning the chemicals out of their diet. Red dye is one of them, and other things to help with learning and then decrease anxiety and depression. Right. And then brain development in children as well. And it changes the gene expression, like the studies with the Holocaust survivors or offspring, a much higher group of anxiety if you had grandparents, you know, parents from the Holocaust. So how does this show up in relationship? There's a lot of combinations, but we'll just go through a couple of them. So jealousy and control comes from trauma 7, personal not feeling good enough, and 2, trauma 2, the verbal messaging. Right. If you weren't told I love you, you're always put down, you will then grow up not feeling good enough. And even consciously, you could say, I know my boyfriend loves me, but the jealousy is just so out of control, right? If you have had abandonment, you see a lot of codependency, a lot of love addiction, and something we call RRS, relationship repetition syndrome. And for our listeners, the research shows that these couples get together, break up, get together an average of 7 times. So that's when you consciously say, I know he's no good for me, but then you keep getting back with him again and again. And the peaceful period is about 10 to 14 days. and then something else happens and you're back into the cycle. People pleasing is very common for women. That comes, let's say you have a difficult father, and it's like, well, if I'm the nice little girl and I'm really good at school, then I won't get hit or I won't get punished, and they'll say they love me. So you always try to do more around the house and be the good little girl. Mm-hmm. And this comes out often from my women that say, I do everything for my husband and my kids, and they do nothing for me. I never feel loved, and their boundaries are so stretched and they're always exhausted. Mm-hmm. And they're not reaching their own goals or dreams. These are often people say, I don't have a purpose. I don't know. I just do everything for my husband and my kids. So I see that over and over again with my women. They can't say no and they overdo and so forth. Perfectionism is another. Mm-hmm. Blaming behavior. If you've ever had that boyfriend or husband that never can apologize and always blames you and turns it around. Mm-hmm. This is signs of childhood trauma. Right. Yelling, of course, and anger. A lot of addiction is started in the teen years, trying to cope with these toxic, dysfunctional family dynamics. So often addiction is a result of this. Being addicted to cheap drama. I said, no drama in our lives. We like things peaceful and calm. Right. And it's funny, if a lot of my women would say, they learn how to date. We go into a whole section of dating and relationships, but before they're like, oh, he was just too boring. I said, that's because you had so much drama as a kid. What you want is peace. You call it boring. You can do things that makes a peaceful relationship fun and exciting, but you want someone, no cheap drama,
Right. Exactly.
For the actors and models, I used to be a talent agent. So there was a lot of imposter syndrome, that they didn't deserve what they accomplished, and they can't see that hard work paid off. And there's a lot of guilt around, doing so well. Impulsivity is the one that tends to break up couples the most. Someone with a high impulse, I do like 6 assessments when they come and see me. If they're high in impulse, it's usually a cheater. That's the guy that says, I know we don't have the money for the shiny red sports car, but I want it. She'll just have to deal with it. Right. And the family's struggling for years to make his car payments. You know what I mean? Right. So that's that impulse, and that tends to be along the line of the narcissist, sociopath. Mm-hmm. Right. Those are some ways that shows up in relationships. Then it shows up in careers, and it shows up in life. Was the life map that I explained.
What you said is so, obviously it's so spot on. And what I pulled from that moment is how so many people do not realize what you said in the beginning is that trauma is 3 generational deep. Mm-hmm. It's passed on, and we have to do the work to heal it. We have to move through it in order to progress into something different. Yes. So you're talking about these assessments, how they show up. One of the biggest things that I often hear is, but I don't know where to start. And of course, when you're in private session, it's a whole different place. But can you kind of walk us through how you would start working with someone to clean up these as you have identified where they are on those lists? Well,
everyone to work with me has to do a life and love transformation discovery session. It's 90 minutes. And the first hour is going over the 6 assessments that I've created. One is that I do use is from Ronnie Fisher, and that's the ACOA checklist. But the rest are tests that I've come up with. And then from how they answer and what's showing up in their life now and their relationship history, I put the puzzle pieces together. I look at the childhood trauma, what was the severity level, and then how it's showing up in their life. And it's funny because I'll put down maybe 3 or 4, and they usually end up missing 2 or 3 traumas because they're so normalized. Like I had one woman did the childhood trauma checklist, and we were like 2 more tests down. Mm-hmm. And she goes, yeah, my father used to beat me with the switch. Mm-hmm. And that was a term I heard from my school kids too. I'd have to pick the branch that my dad would hit me with. Right. So I said, hey, you didn't mention that, physical beatings and the checklist. She goes, oh, well, that happened in my whole neighborhood. Right. So that was a cultural thing, and the norms for that day, that time, that neighborhood for her, that she didn't identify it as physical abuse and trauma. Mm-hmm. So that's why the way I question, again, this is 23 years of working with people with trauma. I really do know how to question them and put the puzzle pieces together. Then these assessments tell me in what areas I have to work in with them to heal all this.
Isn't it interesting? You just were talking about the switch and how normalized something is. It's
Yeah.
so interesting to me where a woman may say, I cannot stand when my kids hit a certain decimal level. I get so upset or anxious. And we begin to talk about that. And I'll say, well, did you live in a loud household? Well, yeah, all the time. Was there a lot of yelling and screaming? Yes. Was that a form of punishment? Yes. Can you look at your life now and realize, even though you are not the one yelling and screaming, that decimal level gets you back into that space?
Yeah.
It's so incredible just to watch that light bulb come on.
Yeah. Yeah. So from the research that I did over the years, I put together a 150-page workbook. So that is the system I use. It's a trademark system. And from how they answer their worksheets and give them to me, then I interpret what teaching I need to do from my toolbox.
Right.
From trauma, from mindset, from, being a therapist. And so they learn as they go. And to me, coaching is working as a team.
Absolutely.
A lot of people go to a counselor and they're just used to talking the whole time to the counselor. No, there's much I have to teach them.
Yes.
Very solution focused. I have to learn a lot of skills. So that's my tool, is my system that I use in my workbook.
Yeah, I'm the same way. You're not coming here to talk. You're coming here to learn. You can talk. We're talking. We got to get through this, the issue, but we are going to put this into action.
Yes.
I personally feel that, talk therapy is great, but it just tends to re-traumatize us over and over again.
Yeah, there's
nothing
just
to pull from it.
Story.
Yeah, we're just stuck in it.
Yeah, that's why I love the coaching model. It's great. And then my system is 50% trauma healing, mindset work. I also have a lot of spirituality, because you have to be spiritual to have some faith for healing.
Yes.
And then part 2 is the exact dating and relationship skills that nobody else taught you.
Right.
Emotionally healthy, evolved, and conscious relationship.
Yeah.
It's a shame everybody learns that, and you still see it on dating sites. Must have chemistry, and I just roll my eyes. Because chemistry is the homeostasis of the brain that takes you back to your past,
right?
Toxic pattern that it recognizes, and the brain doesn't know if it's good or bad. It just recognizes it and say, yes, I like this, and there you go. And then these are the ones that often come up very toxic.
Right. Is there a space that you wished people understood, a thought process around trauma, around what we experience and how it moves us, beyond the systems? But is there something that you wish people really could identify? Like, oh, if I just did this, things would change.
Yeah, if they really just understood that childhood trauma is the basis of all their adult pain. It is, again, working in the rehab center, they're putting a Band-Aid on it, just stopping drugs and alcohol. I was teaching at Stockton University, future drug and alcohol counselors. I had a room with like 65 people. Some were doctors with doctorate degrees. Some were high school grads with just wanted to be a counselor in a rehab because they went to one. Okay.
Right.
So I said, in all your rehabs, how many people are teaching childhood trauma work? 2 people raised their hands.
Wow.
So are you purposely trying to get relapse people back in to buy your system a second or third time? Because unless you're addressing that, no matter whatever you teach, it's not going to work.
Right.
You have to get to the root of the issues. And my people, mine's all holistic, mind, body, spirit. So they're not on psychotropic drugs. If they are, we wean them down because they don't really need them. It's all mindset. So the brain can control how the body reacts, right? So they learn to not trigger. They learn the mindset and the trauma tools to calm the brain and the body.
It's one of the most important thing, and I believe one of the most overlooked processes. So many of us are coming to sessions with the preset manual of what we need to be doing, instead of developing the understanding that we don't need all of these drugs. We can actually control it. If we can clean up what has been, we have the ability to move forward.
Exactly. It's funny you mentioned that about counseling, because in my triple masters of applied clinical and counseling psychology, not once did they mention the words childhood trauma. When I started speaking on this in 2012 and 13, I had other therapists say, you're crazy. This doesn't exist. And it should be. It's a huge miss. And people are totally missing that the childhood trauma piece is causing the love trauma.
Right.
So I said, I got to take this message to the world. So that's when I went from private practice, one office in New Jersey and then Florida, and then went global and started talking on this. But yeah, people just had no clue what I was talking about. They just thought I was crazy.
Yeah.
It's like doing meditation with the kids in the schools too. You're crazy. Why are you doing that? Calms the brain and the body.
That's exactly right. It's a part of my, my sessions every single week. It's necessary. It's really interesting that you talk about the fact that no one was talking about childhood trauma. What we really were talking about was that everybody had all these coping skills that were negative, but we weren't looking at why we had the negative coping skills. Right. What was what was the mechanics behind why we're doing what we're doing?
I mean, we heard about attachment theory, not really how to do anything to solve the problems of attachment.
Right. Let's talk about coping mechanisms of trauma for just a moment, because that is what childhood trauma does for us. If we don't have the ability to really dive in with someone, we don't even realize that that's what's still driving us. We're picking the same partners over and over again. And we say those little buzzwords like, gosh, he reminds me of my dad. And then you can't figure out why you're so unhappy.
Right.
All of these things. We do tend to try to keep ourselves safe with these coping mechanisms. I want to talk about that for just a moment.
Well, I would say the inability to communicate your feelings is one. If you try to speak up as a child and you got slapped, or a bigger punishment because you talked back instead of, nobody's listening to my feelings. They didn't care about your feelings.
Right.
So a woman would then tend, like if her husband's angry, just to shut down. Right. And not have the ability to communicate. And this is what we call empowered communication. That's what I teach. Be empowered. Talk about your feelings in an empowered, confident way. This is who I am. This is what I desire. Like, talk about that.
Right.
So empowered conversation is something that most of us did not learn.
Right.
And it's a way to, I always say work as a team with your partner. So if I have a couple, I have to heal the trauma of partner A and then partner B, and then the third entity is the relationship.
Right.
So I have to pick apart that childhood trauma piece on both of them and do the beginning part of my program individually for each one. Then we open up the communication. Well, because he has this pattern from his past, when you say, just suggest something, he's hearing it as critical. You're telling him what to do, and his mom criticized him. So that triggers him, and then he gets angry at you, then he yells at you. So they're doing these cycles and don't know why. But once they're explained, then I explain the tool around it. Instead, I want you to try this, this, and this. Right. So we have to take apart all the little things that are happening to help, to help.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. We're talking about couples, how much the childhood trauma plays into the relationships and the roles that we take because of said trauma.
Yeah.
And how much conflict that creates in just our daily experience with each other.
Here's an example of that. One of my lesbian clients came to me with her partner, and they were fighting a lot. And she allows me to tell her story, of course. And she was yelling and screaming at her partner. Her partner finally laughed. She goes, I'm not dealing with this. This is abuse. And I said, it is abusive. So let's break down what was happening. So she has 3 no-fault abandonments. When she was very young, her mother died. A few years later, her sister was killed in an accident. And then when she was 30, her father died. So she felt all those that loved her, left her. Right. And she was holding on so tight and so controlling and so jealous if somebody else would try to even talk to her partner. Right. She didn't know why she was so angry all the time. And the anger was there because of her sadness never being healed. So once I could explain it to her and we fixed those response patterns, and I could explain it then to her partner, also Reverend Riana, I ended up officiating their wedding. And they've been together since 2006. So that's why I love being in practice so long, because they're still together, still super happy. And that's how many years? 16 years now?
Yeah.
Something like that. It's a long time. And I had a couple in 2002. The man was a chronic cheater. Shorter Italian man, loved to get attention from women. Why? He was teased and bullied, didn't feel good enough as a kid. So he always wanted female adoration. Well, after the fourth affair, the woman who had already served him papers, she was done. She was out. And he comes crying to me, I can't lose her. And I'm like, well, didn't you think about this? See, this is impulse. Right. As you were saying yes to these women and getting the attention that you were seeking. Well, I just figured I wouldn't get caught. Now we're thinking the narcissist, right? The narcissist is high in impulse, high in selfish. So I had to heal all of that, go into why he was seeking that. Speak to the wife and, convince her to give him another chance. And they're still together. So this is 20 years later. So it's really awesome when your program works and it works all these years, and you don't mean to use them as test subjects. Right. Hey, they're still together, these earlier couples, and they could heal that really toxic behavior and think more consciously using what I call the mindset for success. That's the system that I use. And I've been teaching mindset since my 20s, so over 40 years. So whether they're a model actor and they're trying to believe in themselves that they could win the audition or, get on that multi-platinum CD with a pop singer like my own daughter, she who wanted to be a singer. Let's do it. Mindset is successful for everyone. And I was teaching my students that, and they loved it because it really helped them to feel better about themselves and more confident. So learning mindset is super important for parents to teach their kids too. Yeah.
And to teach themselves, right? If you didn't learn it, you really do need to learn that before, getting into a space where you're trying to teach children how to live out in the world. I think it's such a beautiful process when women come in. I work predominantly with women, unless it's couples that are coming in, where they realize, wow, I wasn't taught all of these things, but now that I have the tools, I can change my behavior and really teach my children. It's such a beautiful process. Like you said, so many years later, you look at them and you're like, you're thriving. Yeah. It's fantastic.
It's really awesome. I know even my daughter, when she was 5, she's watching TV, the Save the Children commercial. She goes, Mom, I'm going to go help those kids in Africa one day. And I said, babe, that's a beautiful dream. I know you can do it. You can do anything you dream to do. Most people would say, they're in Africa. You're not going to go across the world. Right. So at 15, she wants to be a pop singer. Well, let's make that happen. So she sang with the top artists of the day, 3 multi-platinum CDs. She goes on world tour. They go through Africa. She sees the kids begging for things, and she goes, this is the time that I can help the kids in Africa. Beautiful. Now she has 21 walking water wells in Tanzania. Wow. So, when you feed the dreams and your children that anything is possible, she has such a mindset, whatever she does, she's successful at it. People say, it looks so easy for you, Lexi. She goes, I don't know any other way to just say, I'm going to do something and just do it. It always comes together. So mindset is critical. And now I love seeing her teach my grandchildren mindset work, so we can change the generational pull, even if, her parent, my ex, is not involved with mindset at all. I divorced at a very early age and was mom, dad to my kids when they were very young. But one solid parent, that knows how to communicate. We were doing a podcast together, and the one said, so as a mom, did she yell a lot? And she just sits there and she goes, I can't remember one time my mom yelled at me. Not one time. Wow. And I said, because what you're teaching your children, you're modeling to your children, that's going to come back to you. So everything. Parents drop off their teens and say, fix my kid. I said, parents, I need to talk to you. Right. So you say your teenager's yelling at you. So how much yelling is going on in the house? Right. So it is changing the parental norms first, and then them teaching the children and how they communicate with their children is really important. That's success.
Yeah, 100%. Healing is not just a one-off experience. It impacts everything else you touch. Yeah. Every human, every experience, every feeling, every thought that we have. It absolutely touches so much. Is there something that you wished people knew
regarding trauma, just the whole thing that it exists, it's real. So the importance of healing it, it will really open your life in so many areas. All my people start excelling in work, getting raises, getting promotions because they're noticed happier. They have more energy. They're feeling better. They lose weight. I've had people lose 50 pounds, 35 pounds. We work on diet. It's everything holistic, right? To feel wonderful. They're getting these accomplishments done that they only dreamed about before. Now they have the courage to go for things where before they used to be stuck in this, I call it the dark side.
Yeah.
The dark side of life. And either live in the light or live in the dark side. That's part of a mindset lesson. And my dad taught me a lesson early on. And he's there, hon, if you have the power of the 5 Ds, you can do anything. And I'll go into what those are. Because everyone always says, I always use the Ds. Every day I'm thinking of the Ds, am I doing all of this? So this is part of the goal setting, part of my system. So the first one is decide what you really want. Like decision is really important, and think on it for a while and say, yes, I am deciding I'm going to do it. And 2, I am dedicated to the process. It has to be more important than anything. Why do you desire it? Make it an end goal that's really important to you. Then to determination, setting aside the time, the days, what your plan is. So a determined plan, determination. Devotion is the spiritual faith. You can do anything you dream to do. I always say, God's got my back. Dare to dream. And he used to say, dream big, baby. That's my dad. So dare to dream is one. Drive. That is what we call the grind. Every job has the grind, the grunt work, the hard stuff. Like when I'm creating my online school, I mean, those were 14-hour days, day after day after day. That is drive to just write a 400-page book.
Right.
6 months. That's drive. Okay. And then the discipline to stick with it and not quit. Yeah. So those are the 8 Ds that are part of our mindset system. People say, is this gold that I'm doing? Am I putting the 8 Ds behind it?
Yeah. Something we all need, something we all do to some level on, and daily basis, but are we hitting all of those? Generally not, especially if we have trauma in our background. So beautiful, 5 things to hit every single day.
Yeah.
If somebody wanted to work with you, how would they do that?
The best way to find me is my website. It's my name, rianamilne.com. And on there's the 4 free love tests. There's a free ebook going deeper into how childhood trauma impacts relationships and how to have the love you deserve. That's what it's called. You can get the 60 pages of my Live and Love books, the free downloads on there. And then my podcast is Lessons in Life and Love with Coach Riana Milne. So any of those ways.
Perfect. So I know that you listened to a few episodes of the podcast. You then know that every episode we end with the same thing, which is to ask you if you would be willing to share 3 things that you have most gratitude for.
Definitely that I'm spiritual and God is in my life. Without that, I wouldn't have anything. My daughters and the grandchildren, so family is very important to me. That would be 2. And I love my clients. Like, I love that they have the guts to come and say, I'm ready to learn. And that together, our journey just creates a brand new life for them. And I know it's not easy because I had love trauma. And then I discovered, that's how I discovered childhood trauma, by doing my own research, because no counselors could help me. Nobody knew what childhood trauma was at the time. So I just say I'm very grateful for them to opening their hearts and mind to learning this and to share that journey with me. It just makes my life so rewarding to have this kind of purpose in my life.
Beautiful 3s.
So I just want to encourage all the listeners that now is the time to create the life you desire and to have the love you deserve. Don't settle and don't wait.
Yeah, so important. Beautiful advice. Thank you for your time and your energy and the work that you're doing. It's so important. And it's always nice to know that there are people out there just putting their nose to the ground and doing the same kind of work so that we can be better collectively.
Yeah, there's not many of us out there, is there?
No.
No. There really isn't that really have the expertise to do it. It's such important work. And I'm so glad finally the world is understanding it's, what childhood trauma is and its impact.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Such a great conversation. I hope you now have a baseline understanding of childhood trauma and how it may be impacting your life right now. If you would like to learn more about Riana or download her free gift, you can visit her website or our show notes. You can visit that website at rianamilne.com. That's RianaMilne.com. You can also visit her on social media at Coach Riana Milne. Thank you so much for listening to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast. If you've enjoyed these tips for bettering your life and are seeking daily inspiration, additional tools and tips, or even therapy sessions, you can follow me on social media at Get Your Life Together Girl on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and now Clapper. Visit our show notes or blog or even my website at getyourlifetogethergirl.com. And please feel free to share this episode with family members or friends, as it helps spread this message to those who may need it. And while you're at it, I invite you to check out my new 15-day affirmation course, where I take you on a journey how to use your brain chemistry to create your greatest life's desire. It's available right now, and it's linked in the show notes, or you can find it on Insight Timer. Until next time, be kind to yourself and others.